Today's daf is Menachos daf Nun Daled, and we will begin on the last line of daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis. So yesterday, daf Yomi began the fifth parak of Masechtas Menachos, and the fifth parak begins with the halacha. Kol ha-menachos bois matzah. All menachos had to be matzah, meaning the breads of the korban mincha cannot have been chametz. If it was chametz, it was ma'akiv, and the mincha wasn't kosher. With the exception of the chametz of the Torah, some of the breads of the Torah which were dafka brought chametz, the shtei halechem, and the shtei halechem which was brought on Shavuos. On that note, the Gemara brings a brayso. Tan Rabban an ein machmitzin betapuchin, the lachmi toida that had to be chametz, and the shtei halechem which had to be chametz, you couldn't make them chametz using apples. Rather, they had to become chametz in the conventional means. So either with yeast or some other form of sourdough, but it had to be leavened in the typical conventional way. You were not allowed to use tapuchem, apples. In the name of Reb Chanina ben Gamliel, it said that he argued, and he said that you were allowed to make the lachmi toida and the shtei halechem chametz using tapuchem. Rav Kana Masad of Reb Chanina ben Trad. And Anna says that he heard in the name of Reb Chanina ben Trad, regardless of machlokes tanaim, whether the lachmi toida and the shtei halechem could become chametz al yidei tapuchim, or cannot become chametz al yidei tapuchim. Says the Gemara, Kaman Ozla Hadetnan. It's a Mishnah Masechtas Trumas that says tapuach sheriskoi, an apple that was crushed, unas nebeteicha yisa, and was put inside dough v'chimtza, and now the dough became chametz. The dough rose. Harezu asur. The halacha is that the taruvas is going to be awesome. Now this Mishnah is a Mishnah Masechtas Trumas, and it's discussing an apple that was truma. Truma that's nesarev with chulin creates taruvos issues. Now, as long as you have a sheer bittul, the little bit of truma would become bottled to the rest of the taruvos. The Mishnah over here is discussing whether there was enough chulin to be mavatal, the little bit of truma that was inside the taruvos. Stating that, the Mishnah says that if the truma, in this case the tapuach, caused the dough to become chametz, the halach is that even if you have enough chulin to be mevatel the truma, harezu asur, the taruvos is going to be also. And the reason is because there's a klal in taruvos that if it's nicker, the davar muad, even if it's technically batal, but if it's nicker, if it's noticeable, if its impact is felt and seen, then that negates the laws of bittul. And in this case, being that the tapuach is the truma, it's the davar asur, so to speak, and it caused the dough to rise, it made this dough into chametz, thus its impact is nicker. So the halacha is that even if you have a sheer bittul, it's still going to be awesome. Says the Gemara, come on, l'chura, shouldn't this Mishnah be totally in a machlokes Tana, meaning lema Reb Chanina ben Gamliel or Reb Chanina ben Tradian? Meaning, isn't it a raya that something that becomes chametz al yedei tapuach is considered chametz? Because if you're going to tell me that something becomes chametz al yedei tapuach, it's not considered chametz, and it's for that reason that the lachmi toid and the shtei halechem that when the chametz al yedei tapuchim are possible to use as the respective menachos, then the halacha should be that it should be batal, because even though the dough rose, but l'chayret, if it's not considered chametz and halacha, then why do you have this halacha that even if this is sheer bittul arezu asura? But the Gemara says no, it's not. Mechafilu teim rabbanon. Could be that Mishnah even going to rabbanon. Nei the chametz gomer loyhavi nuksha miyahavi. When you learn Masechtas Pesachim, there's something called chametz noiksha. So regular, ordinary chametz is the chametz that if somebody eats on Pesach, he's going to be chayiv karetz. Then there's something called chametz noiksha, which is not chametz in the purest sense, that if somebody eats it on Pesach, he's going to be chayiv karas. But at the same time, it is considered chametz. So that, for example, if somebody eats it, he'll be chayiv malchus. Not karas, it's not real chametz, but it's chametz noish. Rashi says, noish is loshen re'ua. It's like an inferior type of chametz. But the bottom line is, chametz it's going to be. Tain is the Gemara. It's true that the Rabbanon hold, ein machmitzim betapuchem. That when it comes to lachmi toid and shtei halechem, if you would make them chametz, which they have to be, al yedei tapuchem, it would be pasal lemincha, and that's a raya that chimutz al yedei tapuchem is not chimutz. All it means is that it's not the perfect chimutz. So it's possible mincha, and in the context of Pesach, you wouldn't be chayiv kares if you ate that type of chametz on Pesach. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's not chametz at all. L'may nafkamina from a halacha standpoint, it'd be chametz noiksha. And if somebody would eat that type of chametz, again, something that became chametz alidei tapuchim on Pesach, he would be chayiv malchus. The point is that being that everybody agrees that on some level it's chametz, albeit chametz noiksha, it's for that reason everybody agrees that if you have isa that has a tapuach, Sheriskai, that's made up of truma, even if there's a sheer bittul connected the truma, harezu asura, the taruvas is going to be bottled because at the end of the day, the tapuach made it chametz. I thought in halacha, did it make it chametz? No, it's not true. All it didn't do was it didn't make it into the perfect chametz. So it didn't make it chametz so that it should be kosher l'mincha, wherever you need chametz. It didn't make it chametz that you should be chayiv kares if you eat it on Pesach. But it made it chametz noiksha, and that's enough for it to be chametz to say that it's not going to be bottled. Rav Eila said, the kmitza yoisim so we discussed earlier in the Masechta that one of the avodas kashos shebemikdash was kmitza, malika, chafina, that was done on Yom Kippur, and kmitza. Says Rav Eila that the most difficult kmitza to do was the minchas chayte, and the reason is because the minchas chayte had two unique characteristics. Number one, la yasam aleh shemen, v'la yitein aleh levayna. There was no oil, there was no levayna. Being that there was no shemen, there was no oil, it comes out it was dry. And if it's dry, it's much more difficult to do the kmitza. So what was the hard part of doing kmitza? The hard part was you had to make sure that the kmitza filled the three fingers that were the kaimetz, but you also had to make sure that nothing protruded. Because a kmitza can't be either chaser or yaser. Chaser meaning if it's missing a little bit, yaser meaning if there's a little bit too much. So the kmitza had to be perfect. You had to take your three middle fingers, scoop them, and make sure that there was nothing protruding from the sides. Now, what if there was something protruding? So the Gemara discussed how the kohen would take his thumb and his pinky and he would smoothen it out. Now, if the mincha itself is of a liquidy form, or it's at least it's somewhat moist, it's not so difficult to do. But a dry mincha is going to be much more difficult. Rabbi Eila said that from all the shvere kmitzos, ein locha hakasha lekmitza yoisim minchas chayte. And the reason is because it was dry. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi Yama minchas chayte megabel b'mayim b'ksher. No, the minchas chayte didn't have to be so hard. And Rabbi Yitzchak Avdimi said a very big chiddush, because even though the Torah says lo yitin aleh shemen, that just means you're not allowed to put oil, but it doesn't mean you're not allowed to put any other liquid into the mincha. You could put mayim, you could put water. Oil you can't, like the Torah says. But water, maybe yeah. Reb Shimon, whose Dirish time of the cross, said that why is there not allowed to be oil? This is a chayte, and we don't want the chayte's carbon to be mahudar. Okay, maybe that's a svara in shemen, in oil. Oil would make the mincha mahudar, but mayim is not going to make it mahudar. Regardless, Rav Eila said that the kmitza of the minchas chayte was very, very difficult because it was dry. If the Torah says you can't put oil, so you can't put in anything. Rabbi Yisrael Avdimi said no, only oil you're not allowed to put in, but mayim you're allowed to put in. Says the Gemara. At first glance, would it be fair to say that this machlokes Rav Eila and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi isn't just a local, regional machlokes regarding the minchas chayte? Could I put water in or could I not put water in? But rather, maybe it's a global shaila, and that is the mar savar k'moishe hein misharin umar savar lik'mois shahayu misharin. And as we'll see, this machlokes right here, these two tzadim will be the topic of today's daf. So for now, let's just go through it briefly, and as we go through the daf, we'll have a better understanding of what these two tzadim are. But for now, says the Gemara, would it be fair to say that maybe the machlokes is anytime you need a shear of something? So in this case, you need a shear of kaimetz. You need a shear of a kmitza. Do you look at the shear right now, or do you look at the shear based on what it had been previously? Meaning the mincha of the minchas chayte is made up of soilus. That's what the mincha is. Now you want to go ahead and add water. Okay, but that's not the perfect mincha. The perfect mincha ordinarily has soilus, has levaina, and has shaman. In the case of minchas chayte, where there's no levaina and there's no shaman, it's made up of soilus. So when we go ahead now and we say it's okay to add water, now you have to don the shear. Make sure you had the right comments. Do I look at the shear based on the way it is right now, based on the soilus and the mayim, or do I look at the shear based on what it was supposed to be? If the way I look at the shear is based on its status right now, which is made up of soilus and mayim, and the mayim somehow gets included in the sheer kaimetz that I need, so then you would say that as long as this kmitza that I did is the right shear, as long as it's not chaser, it's not yaser, everything would be fine. But if the way I look at a shear is not kimoishehein, not the way they are right now, but rather lik kimoishehein, the way it was, and the mincha was, before I added the water, merely silas. So it has to be a shear kaimetz of only silas, and if it's missing a little bit of silas, it's going to be chaser. Or if there's too much silas, it's going to be yaser. So maybe that in and of itself would be a reason that I can't add water. Because once I add water, it's going to manipulate the shear of the silas. And when we talk about a kaimetz that's chaser, or a kaimetz that's yaser, I'm looking at it with only silas, not with any water. So time is the Gemara, perhaps this shiloh between Rav Eila and Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi, whether you're allowed to add water to the minchas chayte isn't just a shayla. When the Torah says no shemen, does it only mean no shemen? Or it doesn't mean I can't add any foreign object. I can't add water either. Maybe really it's totally in a much bigger shayla. It's totally in a shayla in all shiur. Again, the Gemara is going to go through other simpler applications of this shayla. But do I look at a shear kim moishein, or do I look at a shear as lik kim moishein? If I look at a kim moishein, to the extent I'm allowed to add water, then you look at the shear kaimetz based on what it is right now. So as long as right now it's not chaser or yaser, it's going to be fine. So there's no reason I shouldn't be able to add water. But if I look at a lik kim moishein, that means the shear has to be before I added the water. Before I added the water, I have to have a full kaimetz of soilus. Once I add water, I'm playing around with that. That in and of itself would be a reason that it should be possible. But says the Gemara, it could be everybody holds Sai Rav Eila, Sai Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi, Kim Moshe Meshan. You look at it based on where it is right now. So based on that, everybody should hold that it's okay to add water. What then is the machlokes? When it says that the minchas chayte had to be chareva, it means chareva dry in the sense that there's no oil. No, dry means dry. You're not allowed to have anything in it. Regardless, we mentioned over here, but derech agav. Tut stadim, and how you look at shiurim. Do you look at a shear kim moishein, or do you look at a shear as lik kim moishein? So the Gemara is going to digress now for an entire daf. It's going to take us literally onto daf nun hey. This shaila in all shiurim, kim moishein or lik kim moishein. Tan hasam, we learned in a mishnah, and this is a mishnah in Mesechtes Uktzin. Basar ha'egel shenitfach. If somebody had meat of an egel, shenitfach, he cooked it, and because he cooked it, the meat, the shear, the size of it expanded a little bit. It blew up. If somebody had meat of an older animal that was cooked, and when it cooked, it shrunk. So the shaila now is do I have a shear oichlin regarding tumah or not? So we know that oichlin becomes tameh if it has a shear of kebeya. Ordinarily, when you talk about shiurim and oichlin, you're thinking in terms of kezayas. When it comes to Yom Kippur, it's bekaiseves. There's a few exceptions to it, but ordinarily you're thinking in terms of kezayas. Tumas oichlin is not big kezayas. Tumas oichlin is big kebeya. Shaila the Rishonim, does that mean that oichlin can't become tameh if you have less than a beya? What about chatzi shear when it comes to tova? I've spoken a lot about that. Or does it mean that it only can't be mitameh? But just to keep it simple, let's assume it means that oichlin cannot become tameh unless you have a shear of a bear. So what you had over here is you had meat that either expanded or shrunk because of some bishul, of something that you did to the meat. The question is, when I dan, does it have a shear kebeya regarding tumah? Do I look at it based on what it was before I cooked it? Or do I look at it based on the way it is right now? So it says the Mishnah, it's a Mishnah in the second parak of Mesechtes Uktzin. Basar ha'egel shenitfach, upasar skeina shenis ma'ich, mishtarin likim moishehem. And the question is, what's the right gears in this Mishnah? Rav, Rav Chia, Rav Yochanan Amri, mishtarin kim moishehem. The right gears in the Mishnah is kim moishehem. I mean, you look at the way it is right now. If right now it's a beya, it's going to be tummy tumas leichel. If right now it's not a beya, it's not going to be tummy tumas leichel. Shmuel, for Rab Shimon bar Rabbi, for Reish Lakish, Amri mishtarin likim moishehem. No, you don't look at the way it is right now, but rather you look at the way it was. So if when you stuck it into the pot, before you did anything to it, if it had a shear of beya, then it's going to be metama tumas leichel. If it didn't have a shear of a beya, it's not going to be a tumas leichel. Incidentally, if you look at these names a little bit more carefully, so these were Gedoyle Amayroyim. You have Rav on one side, Shmuel on the other side, Reb Chia on one side, and Reb Shimon bar Rebbe on the other side. Reb Chia, Reb Shimon bar Rebbe were both Talmidim of Rebbe. They're both Bali Plukt in Shas. And then you have Rabbi Yochanan on one side, and Reish Lakish on the other side. Either way, so Shaila, in the Girsa, in this Mishnah Mesechtes Uktzin, is it Kim Moshein, or is it Lik Kim Moshein? Very big daf gemin al halach. These are diametrically opposed understandings of the Mishnah. Do you look at the way it is right now, or do you look at it the way it was previously? I'll ask you a kasha. Basar of an egel that didn't have a shear. And then you did something to it, and as a result, it expanded. And now it does have the shear. So what's the halacha? It's a brisa. Tar l'shavar v'tamim mikanu laba limafreya. When it didn't have the shear, if anything touched it, it's going to be tar. But mikanu lahaba, from the time that it was already tafach, if something touches it, it's going to be tameh. So you see clearly that you look at it kim shehen. You look at the way it is right now. You don't look at it the way it was. You only look at it the way it was if you're daning limafreya. But if you're looking at it mikanu laba, then you look at the way it is right now. So isn't it a mafurish raya to those shitas that hold likam shehen? If you take a look at Rashi says v'kasha l'reish lakish. It's a kasha and reish lakish that holds likam shehen. I don't know why Rashi only picks Reish Lakish. It's really a kasha on Shmuel and Reb Shimon ben Rebbe and Reish Lakish. But the bottom line is, the kasha of Reish Lakish, it's a kasha on the shita that holds. You look at it the way it was, the churi. See from here, you look at it the way it is. So the Gemara says midrabanan. And deals on my Ram, I'm going to hold that really this brisa holds. You look at it likam shehen, and being that likam shehen, it didn't have a shear. Really midiraisa it should be tar. The reason the brisa says that mikanu lahabot is going to be tameh is only midrabanan. Ihachim a sefer. The problem is, how does it work with the sefer? V'chein bepigel v'chein b'noiser. The brisa says the same is going to be true regarding pigel and noiser. If we're dealing with the deraisa level, I understand pigel and noiser. And the beer in the Gemara's kasha is that pigel and noiser both carry with them a chi of karas. And that's pashut. The Gemara understands that the only time there would be a chi of karas for someone that eats chavi krisus is if he violates the chavi krisus on a deraisa level. But if somebody violates a chavi krisus on a rabbanon level, for that he's not going to be chavi karas. So if the brisa says that this halacha is true for pigel and noiser, it sounds like from the stimas habraisa that there'll even be karas, which seems to suggest that we're dealing on a deraisa level. We're not dealing with the Rabbana level. So Bishloima, when the Brisa says Vitami Mikanu Laba, it means even Midei Raisa, because the way you look at this shear is the way it is right now, and right now it has a shear. I don't care what was. I look at it the way it is this second, Kim Moshehin, like Rav and Rav Chia and Rabbi Yochanan. I understand the application to Pigel and Oyser. Eli Amrid Rabbana. But if you're going to tell me that really Midei Raisa, you look at the way it was, like Shmuel and Rav Shimon ben Rebbe and Reish Lakish. But when we say Tami Mikanu Lahaba, we just mean midrabanan. Freit the Gemara, pigel v'noisa midrabanan. Do you have pigel v'noisa and midrabanan? Do you have chorus when it comes to the rabbanan? So the Gemara says, "Eima v'chem b'tumas, pigel v'chem b'tumas noisa." When the Brisa says pigel v'noisa, it doesn't mean the chi of pigel and the chi of noisa, but rather what it means is tumas pigel, tumas noisa, and that's based on a mission in the Masechtas Pesachim that says that the chachamim will geyser tuma on noisa and on pigel. So in addition to all the sugis that you have regarding pigel and Masechtas Zvachim and Menachos, that injury to insult or insult to injury, what you also have is you also have tumah. Oh, by the way, if the kohen touches pigel, he becomes tummy. If he touches noiser, he becomes tummy. Now that tumas pigel, tumas noiser, of course, is only a drabanan, and that's what the Brisa is saying. What the Brisa is saying is that not only if it expanded the food to a shir beya, is there going to be tumah midrabanan mikanu laba? You're also going to have the tumah of noiser, because if it was pigel and noiser, we're going to say that now it becomes tummy as well. Why would you think tumas pigel and tumas noiser is different than ordinary tumas neichlin? So good. I would have thought, however, tumas pigel, tumas noiser drabanan, being that the whole tumah is a fabrication of the Rabbah. It's only the Rabbanon. It's not a Deiraisa Digedin. It's all the Rabbanon. They're the ones that instituted this whole Tumah. On a Deiraisa level, no such thing as Tumah's Pigel, Tumah's Noiser. So Kuli Abd Rabbanon, Avid Rabbanon. I would have thought the Rabbanon weren't Machmer on their own, the Rabbanon, Kamash Malon. That's not the way it is. The bottom line is, if we have a Machlokes again, between the Gedolei Amayroim, if something didn't have a share and now it has a share, or something had a share and now it doesn't have a share, and you want to know, with regards to the Tumas Oichlin, a Mishnah Mesechtes Uktzin. Do you look at it based on where it is right now, or do you look at it based on where it was? Some hold Kim Moshein, you look at where it is right now. Others hold Lik Moshein, you look at it, what it was. Time to the Gemara having before a Brisa. A Brisa says that if I had something that didn't have a shear, and now it has a shear, so it's Torah L'Sha'avar, that's Pashut, and it's going to be Tamei Mikanu Laba. Why is it Tamei Mikanu Laba? Bishlam, if you look at it the way it is right now, okay, right now it has the shear, that's why it's Tamei Mikanu Laba. But if you look at Lik Moshein the way it was, who cares that now it has the shear? So the Gemara says, if you hold, you look at it Kim Moshein, then it's Pashut. If you you hold likim Moshe, you're going to have to say it's midrabanan. I mentions nicer and pigel. Those are the Reisidig ideas. Tumas nicer and Tumas pigel. That's what it means. And those are not the Reisidig ideas. Toshma, I'll bring you a raya from the next part of that price. Basar skena shayba kashir. This is the opposite case. You had basar skena that had the shear. Fit samak. It was cooked. Because it cooked, it shrunk, and now it's pachas mikashir. So what's the halacha? Tameh lisha avar v'tahar mikanu laba. Lisha avar, it's going to be tameh, but mikanu laba, it's going to be tahar. What's the kasha? The kasha is, if you're going to tell me that you look at it likum shehein, why is it tahar mikanu laba? It had the shear. Elamai, you look at it kim shehein. You don't look at it likum shehein. Here you can't tell me with the rabbanon. If the brisa, like in the ratio, was saying a chumrah, so then you could tell me it's a chumrah d'rabbanan. But here it's a kula. Here you tell me that even though it had the shear, being that right now it doesn't have the shear, it's going to be tar. So Bishlam, if you look at it right now, it's wonderful. But if you look at it the way it was, then l'chura, how do you have a right then to tell me now it's going to be tar? What kind of Rabbanan is this? Amar Rabba. So Rabba said like this: we have no choice but to narrow the machlokes between Rav Chi and Rabbi Yechon on the one hand, and Shmuel, Reb Shimon Bar Rebbe, and Rish Lakish on the other hand, as follows: anytime there was a shir meikara, and now there's no shir lesbe, then the halach is everybody agrees. That's the raya from this last Tashma. Everybody's going to agree there's no shir Tumas Leichon. If this second there's no shir and something touches it, there's nothing to worry about. If previously there was no shear and now there's a shear, everybody is going to agree. That was the first Tashma, the raya from the first brisa, midrabanan. Everyone's going to agree that midrabanan, it's going to be Tommy. Keep ligi. What's the machlokes? There was a shear. Vitzamak, and then it shrunk. V'chaza v'tafach, and then it expanded again. So it right now has a shear, but there was an interim time when it didn't have the shear. What's the shayla? Another Yesodi shayla. The mar savar yesh dichui be'isura, umar savar ein dichui be'isura. So we're very familiar with the concept of dichui because it's a kachim term, and that is something that is pasul to be used as a carbon. It's pasul la'akrava. Even if that psul later goes away, the carbon remains pasul. It takes on a life of its own. It's what's known as dichoy. Something that was once dachoy remains forever dachoy. Now there's shailas, if something's dachoy meikara, is there a psul dachoy when it comes to balei chayim, shmami natlas, the Gemara always says, regarding the laws of dichoy. But that's the basic gist of dichoy. That once something gets pushed away, even if later the circumstances that pushed it away no longer exist, but it doesn't matter. Once you're pushed away, you're forever pushed away. That's the concept of dichoy. Regardless, time is the Gemara. In this case, where something had a shear for Tumas Eichlin, and now the shear went away. It's not there anymore. And now something happened again that it suddenly does have the shear. So the shaila is, do you say that once it was nitztamek, once it was less than the shear, at that time it was dachoy. I don't care that later it was chazav v'tafach. Why? Because this dichoy, and even though we're not dealing with kachim over here, this is not a kachim, even though we're learning kachim, but this is not a kachim diga halacha. This is halacha in the laws of Eichlin, Tumas Eichlin, and Shirei Achila as it relates to Isurei Achila. But the point is that just like there's halacha of dichoy when it comes to kachim, there's halacha of dichoy when it comes to Isra as well. In other words, yesh dichoy b'Isura. Other man holds ein dichoy b'Isura. So once it gets pushed away, I don't care. As long as right now it has a shear, that's enough to say that there's going to be a Tumas Eichlin. So the shaila is not whether K'moy Shehein or Lik'moy Shehein so much as it is whether Yesh Dichoy Be'Isura or Ein Dichoy Be'Isura. So we completely change the nature of the fundamental principle that these Amiram were arguing about. We thought it was a Greisa Shaila. K'moy Shehein or Lik'moy Shehein. It's still a Greisa Shaila. But another shayla. It's not k'moshein or likamoshein, but rather what it is yesh dichoy be'isura or ein dichoy be'isura. Fake the Gemara. Is it possible to hold yesh dichoy be'isura? It's true in kachem. There's a concept of dichoy. By mitzvahs you find it as well, by the way. But in terms of isser ve'eter, is there anyone that holds yesh dichoy be'isser ve'eter? By the time we learned in the Mishnah, kebeya oichlin she'dicha v'cham. If somebody had a kebeya of oichlin, he put it in the cham v'nismatu, and now it's less than a beya. V'chein kazayis min ameis kazayis min anavelo. Ukada dosha min asheretz. Ukazayis pigel, kazayis noiser, ukazayis chelav. So you have a shear of oichel that's tameh. You left it outside, and now it shrunk. Thus, it doesn't have the shear anymore. Let's say you left it out in the rain afterwards. Now it expanded again. Now the halacha becomes tummy. What's the bottom line? You see that even though it had once shrunk, and it was once at a point where it would not have been tameh, but once it's chazav and nitfach, the halacha is you're chayav all over again. In other words, ein dichoy b'yisurim. So, freak the Gemara, is it possible that there's a man that holds yesh dichoy b'yisurim? I have a mufurish brayso that says ein dichoy b'yisurim, and the Gemara says tiyufta l'manda amar yesh dichoy b'yisurim tiyufta. In other words, checkmate. Zok the Gemara Tashma. I'll bring you a raiva to the original Shiloh. So again, we started off with a Shiloh of Kim Moshein or Likim Moshein. Why are we talking about this Shiloh of Kim Moshein or Likim Moshein? Because the Gemara brought a machlokes between Rav Eila and Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi. The Menachos Chayte with the Torah says, is it okay to put mayim or is it not okay to put mayim? Rav Eila said it's not okay to put mayim. And that's where Rav Eila said that we know Kmitza was one of the avodas kasher sheb and mikdash. Eilocha hakasher likmitza yoysim Menachos Chayte. Because the Menachos Chayte was dry, there was no oil, there was no water, there was no foreign ingredient inside the Menachos Chayte, and as a result, it was very difficult to do the Kmitza. Rabbi Yitzchak Dimi said, no, it wasn't so hard. Well, you can make it just as moist as you can make an ordinary mincha. I am not allowed to put shemen. Yeah, shemen you're not allowed to put. But you're allowed to put water. The question is, what was the shayla? So the Gemara thought maybe the shayla is when you dan the sheer kaimitz, after adding water, would you look at the shear based on the kaimitz with the water? Or do you look at the shear based on where it was before the water? Is it Kim Moshein or is it Likim Moshein? If it's Likim Moshein, then adding water would create a shayla of chasav yaser. As a result, the Gemara suggests that maybe that's the beer in the machlokes of Eila Rabbi Yitzchak bar Dimi. And the Gemara, in the same breath, literally on the same line, Teich Kedei Dibur was mevatel, and that's not what the shayla is. Nothing to do with that. Could be everybody agrees Kim Moshein. The question is when it says that the mincha had to be chareva, is a chareva mishemeres or a chareva mikol davar? From there, the Gemara digress. We mentioned the shayla of Kim Moshein, Likim Moshein to another application, and that is the Mishnah Masechtas Uktzin, where the Mishnah actually uses the words Kim Moshein and a big shayla in Namiram. Is the girsa Kim Moshe or Likim Moshe? You have Rav and Shmuel, you have Rabbi Yechon Rish Lakish, you have Rabbi Chirish and Berebi. But the bottom line is a shayla over there. If you had oichel that needs to be kishir kebeya in order for it to be tameh, what happens if it was a kebeya and now it was nismaich, it was nitztamik, it's less than a kebeya, or in the reverse, it was nitfach, it wasn't a kebeya, now it is. So why does that impact tumas leichel? The Gemara thought very simple. Kim Moshe or Likim Moshe. But the Gemara brought Bryce this way, Bryce is that way, and the bottom line is the Gemara said that shayla is something else. It's a shayla of yesh dichoy be'isura or ein dichoy be'isura. The Gemara says Tashma, I'll bring you a riot to this shayla of Kim Moshe or Likim Moshe from a third area in halacha, and that is the halachis of Maisra. Says the Mishnah, Tormin te'einin al ha-groigris. You're allowed to take truma or Maisra, as we'll soon see, from te'enim, figs, ala groigris, on behalf of dried figs, but only b'minyan. Only way you're allowed to do it is based on minyan. And really the background to this halacha, which is a teisefta, in Mesechtes Trumas is that there's really three ways you could take Meiser. So Meiser has to be 1/10. Meiser Rishon is 1/10 of your produce, you're supposed to give to the Levi. Ezra, concept of Levium, but you're supposed to take 1/10 of your Meiser and you're supposed to give it to the Levi. How exactly do you assess the 10th? So a tenth, what does a tenth mean? So it means if I have 10 apples, I have 10 figs, I take one. So there's three ways you could do it. You could do it either b'minyan, b'mida, or b'mishkal. B'mida would mean, you have 10 apples, take one, give it to the Levi. 9 for me, 1 for you. That's the way it would work. B'mida would mean that you measure. You measure the apples, and you take 1/10 of the measurement, you give it to the Levi, 9/10 you keep for yourself. B'mishkal would mean you weigh it. You would weigh it, and you would take 9/10 of what you weighed, you keep for yourself. 1/10 you'd go ahead and give away. Now the truth is, the perfect way of doing it, Chazal said, was either b'mida or b'mishkal. B'minyan is sort of the cop-out way of doing it. But the Chachamim allowed you to do the minyan way. And the reason is because at the end of the day, the numbers are all going to be very, very similar. It should pretty much work itself out, right? Because you're always being aser from one min on behalf of another min. It's apples on behalf, it's apples to apples, right? not apples to oranges, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. And as a result, so whether it's mita or whether it's mishkal or whether it's minyan, give or take, within very, very small room for error, it's going to end up being the same number anyways. So even though the perfect way of doing it, this is important to understand the sugya, is b'midah or b'mishkal, but you could do it really in one of three ways. You could do it b'minyan, b'midah, or b'mishkal. Stating that, zok the Tosefta in Masechtes Trumas, if somebody was being toirem from te'enim on groigris, now te'enim are figs and groigris are figs. The difference is te'enim are figs, groigris were pressed figs. They're already dried figs. Once you have dried figs, the figs, they shrink. Rashi says that they shrink with a ratio from 1 to 2. So if you want to look at it from a size or a weight standpoint, one regular gezinta fig is going to equal 2 groigers, 2 oisgeklapta figs. That's pretty much the way it's going to play itself out. As a result, if you're going to do the meiser, b'mida u'b'mishkol, you're going to end up with issues. So think about it. If you're going to take a regular fig and you're going to be toirim on behalf of the dried figs, so for 10 dried figs, if you're using the midah or the mishkol, being that it's a 1 to 2 ratio, you're going to end up being ma'aser a half a fig. A half a fig on behalf of 10 is the wrong number. It has to be 1 on behalf of 10. As for that reason, the Chachamim said over here, you can use midah, you can use mishkal, what you have to use is minyan. Oh, if you use minyan, it's going to be fine. Why is it going to be fine? Because then it's going to be 1 fig. It doesn't matter if it's dried or if it's not dried. At the end of the day, for every 10, you're going to take off 1, and you're going to keep 9 for yourself. So Zok the Braisa tar mintein and ala groigris, but here's the key word: bim minyan. Zok the Gemara Geshmak. If when it comes to all shiurim, whether it's the shear of the koinetz, that's how this all started, or whether it's the shear oichlin as it relates to bay of Tomas oichlin, or whether it's the shear of fruit as it relates to the laws of Meiser. You always look at it the way it was, not the way it is. Then I understand this halacha. Why, when you're toirim te'enim ala groigris, so you have to do it b'minyan, because these groigris were once regular te'enim, and if you're going to go and use midah mishkal, it's going to come out. You're not being ma'asa the proper shir. But if it's supposed to be all shiurim the way they are right now, then what's the problem of doing it this way? In fact, you should have to do it b'midah v'mishkal. You shouldn't be allowed to do it b'minyan, because if you're going to do it b'minyan, you know what's going to happen? Havali marbe b'maisres. You can end up giving too much meiser. Because essentially, from a midah and a mishkal standpoint, which is the perfect way of being ma'aser, that's why this is important. Because the only way to understand this kasha. The real way to do it is b'midah and mishkal. So if you're going to do it now, b'minyan, it's going to be double the midah and the mishkal, based on that 1 to 2 ratio. If that's the case, you're giving twice the amount of ma'aser you were supposed to give. And that's a bad thing. What do you mean? I give chaimish, right? I want to give more ma'aser. It's not so pasha. Yeah, maybe with ma'aser ksafim, tavay olav bracha, ask your local rabbi. But that's because there's no tevel implications. But when it comes to Meiser Rishon, when you're dealing with laws of Tevel, Misa B'dei Shamayim, it's not so simple to be Marbe B'Masrois. In fact, it's a brisa. Tanyu, I'm Marbe B'Masrois. If someone gave more than 1/10 of his Meisers, Peiroisa Mesukanim, the Peirosa Mesukan, Umasroisa Mekukalim. But the Meiser itself is messed up. It's Mekukal. Why? The cheshbon is like this. If you give more than 1/10 of Meiser, so let's say you have 10 figs, and you take off, instead of 1, you take off 1.5, or you take 2, or you take 3. So now you took off 3 figs, let's call it, right? So the 7 figs that you left are not tevel anymore, because if I took off 30%, included in that is the 10% that I had to take off, so there's no issues with tevel anymore. Where you run into problems is that the 3 that you took off are not all meiser. Only one of them is meiser. And number 1. Number 2, the one that's meiser didn't make the other 2 that are not meiser not tevel anymore. Because when you were toirem, when you were ma'aser, all you were being ma'aser on behalf of was the ones that were remaining. But the ones that I took off, I never had in mind to be ma'aser for. So the nishtahina, nishtaheh, they weren't left over in the kri, so that we should say that what I took off was ma'aser on its behalf. At the same time, it wasn't chamaiser on it. As a result, the maesters themselves are going to be tevel. If the maesters themselves are going to be tevel, so now I have tevel mu'urav with my meiser. So says the Gemara, peiroisa mesukanim, whatever's remaining is fine, but the meiser itself is going to be mekukah. Says the Gemara, ela meiser, this is a raya that you go go kim Moshe, because it's a raya that you go lik Moshe, because if you go kim Moshe, then it shouldn't be okay to go ahead and do it b'minyan, because by doing it b'minyan, you're being a marbe b'maisers. Ella says the Gemara, "Mai lik Moshe." So you can tell me, okay, so you have a raya for me, then it must be lik Moshe. Ima seif, take a look at the seif groigris al teinin. V'mida. What happens if it's in the reverse case? What happens if you're taking groigris on behalf of teinim? So then you're ready. You could do a b'mida. Fake the Gemara. I'm a b'shleim kim Moshe. B'shleim if it's kim Moshe. Shaper. You look at it the way it is right now. I got why you can use mida. Eli yamar lik Moshe. But if you can tell me you're supposed to look at it based on the way it was, again you're a marbe b'maisers. Eller says the Gemara must be hacha. This Tosefta Mesachtes Trumas b'Truma Gedola Askinan is talking not about Meiser, but rather it's talking about Truma Gedola. V'Reisha Bayin Yafa, v'Seifa Bayin Yafa. What's the difference if we're talking about Truma Gedola or Meiser? It's a very big difference. Meiser is 1/10. Meiser has a scientific number. Truma is chita achas peteres asakri. Truma, there's svaris of ayin yafa, there's an ayin ra, there's a concept of a beinani. There's different ways of giving truma, but it's not a perfect science. Where it's a perfect science, such as Meiser, so then you have issues of being marbe b'meisers. Then you have to know, is it kim Moshe or is it lik kim Moshe? That's where this whole aforementioned discussion is relevant. But says the Gemara, from this brisa, the reish and the sefer together, it's muchach that we're not talking about Meiser, rather we're talking about Truma, and being that we're talking about Truma, there's no issues. Why does the Mishnah want me to do it one time this way, the other time the other way? What's the difference if I'm being mafresh from the Tainim on the Gregors or the Gregors on the Tainim, if there's no science to it anyways? If it's anyways chita achas beteres asagri. Says the Gemara, it's all in the realm, it's all in the world of ayin yafa. There's a concept of being tayr by yafa, but enochanami. It's not something that's meikredim. But the Gemara says, "Ihachi ema sefer." There's a sefer to that sefta. Amir Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi. Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi said, "Abba hoya noitel esek roiger shebe miktzaya." Who is Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi's father? Who is his Abba? The Tana Rabbi Yosi. So he says, Rabbi Yosi used to take 10 groiger shebe miktzaya, 10 oiske klapte groigers, altishin shebe kolkala, and he would use that for the 90 that were remaining in the kolkala. What's the kasha? Very obvious question. What's the kasha? If we're talking about Truma Gedola, Eser Maya Vidite, why is it 1/10? The Brisa itself said Tormin Te'enim ala Gregors. We thought Tormin means Meiser. The Gemara said no, it means Truma. If it's Meiser, it has implications to our sugya. If it's Truma, then it's just a Shaila Vayin Yaf. It has no real implications on our sugya. But the Gemara says that Tosefta has a Sefer, and the Tosefta brings a Meiser Shahaya Kachaya with an edus of Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi, the name of his father Rabbi Yosi, who's discussing the same halacha of the Mishnah, figs versus dried figs, and he's talking about a 10th. Obviously, we're dealing with Meiser, so now we have to go and reassess everything we just said in light of the shaila of Kim Moshe or Lik Kim Moshe. But the Gemara says it's not muchach. And although Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi was talking about a 10th, what he maybe meant was still truma, but not regular trumas meiser. What's trumas meiser? So after the Levi got meiser rishon, he had to now take 1/10 and give it for trumas meiser. And even though his halacha was 1/10, but as we'll see now, his 1/10 is not like the meiser rishon 1/10. It's much more similar to the laws of truma. The laws of trumas meiser mirror, according to some shitas, the laws of truma gedola. When the Torah talks about truma, it says trumas chamaloshen rabin, which suggests two types of trumas: achas truma gedola. So the pasuk was makish then Truma Gedola and Trumas Meiser. L'may nafkimina kashem Truma Gedola tell us about even machshava kach Trumas Meiser tell us by me. Two chidushim regarding Truma Gedola. Number one, you don't have to measure it mamish bediktok. You can take your best guesstimate and give Truma Gedola that way. The same is true for Trumas Meiser. Additionally, Truma Gedola is nitelas b'machshava, so too Trumas Meiser is nitelas b'machshava. Additionally, Truma Gedola b'ayin yafa, Trumas Meiser b'ayin yafa. There's a concept of, but the bottom line is, just because Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi said that Abba Hoya Noitel in this same case, Groigris and Te'inim Shebekilkala attend, it doesn't necessarily mean that he was talking about Meiser Rishon. He too was talking about Truma Gedola. Thus, you can't bring any rayas, but the Gemara says it's not true. You could still bring a raya. We'll end with this. Umina, is that true? What did Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi say? So Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yosi was being mafresh Truma Gedola. Trumas Meiser, not Truma Gedola, not Meiser Rishon. It was Trumas Meiser. And what did he used to do? What was his minig? His minig was Hayonaitel Esek Groiger Shebe Miktzaya Altishim Shebe Kolkala. Now clearly he was trying to get it 1/10. And even though it doesn't have to be 1/10, you're right. because it's niteles ba'oimei, just like Truma Gedolos. But at the end of the day, what was he trying to do? He was trying to get it as 1/10. And what was the 10th that he was doing? He was counting. He was being mafresh at Piminyan. So time is the Gemara. At the end of the day, we could still be machriya the shayla. Because if the way you look at the shear is the way it was, shaper, then I understand that he's taking 10 oiske klapta figs on behalf of 90 regular figs. And even though based on the mid and the mishkol it doesn't work, but it works based on the reason he's working on the minyan is because he understood that you have to dan the shear based on the way it was. So even though right now from a mid and a mishkol standpoint it doesn't work, but you don't look at where it is right now. You look at where it was. And once they were all Tainim Shevakul Kala. And that's why he was doing it. But if you look at a Kamay Shehem, Batzalahu, because the 10 that he took were already Iskiklap. As a result, they were pressed figs. If they were pressed figs, it was half the size. So it's like he was taking off 5 on behalf of the 90, not 10 on behalf of the 90. Says the Gemara, isn't it at the end of the day a raya likamay shehein? Yes, Rav Dimi, I'm Rabbi Laza, it's not a raya. Shani Gregris, Hayel v'yachal l'shok and l'chzir likamay shehein. After this whole amid of Gemara, where we go down this journey of laws of Meiser and Shumas Meiser and Shuma Gedola, the bottom line is, as it relates to the basic halacha of kamay shehein or likamay shehein, at the end of the day, being that you could make it back, you have to work out the tchiyah. But being that you can make it back to likim Moshe at the end of the day, that's why it's different. And there is a svara you do see from Yossi likim Moshe, but that's only because the Moshe was transient, or at the very least, the Moshe, the status quo was something that you could very easily undo. But when you have a Moshe that you can easily undo, over there the halachas, the bottom line is we had a shayla over here of Kim Moshe and Likim. Every time you have a shir, it was once like this, and now it's like that. It was once like that, now it's like this. Do you look at the way it was, the good old days, or do you look at it based on the way it is right now? We had 3 nafkamidas la'alacha, 3 completely different sugyas. The first one was Menachos related, a shayla of the minchas chayte, could you add mayim or not? The Gemara thought maybe it's totally in the shayla. The second was Tumas Oichlan, a Mishnah Mesachtes Uktzin, with regards to the sheer bay of Tumas Oichlan, and the third is a Braisa Mesachtes Trumas, and that is where there's a halacha of being ma'aser, b'mida, b'mishkol, b'minyan. What happens if you be ma'aser from one thing onto another thing where one shrunk, such as Gregors, you have pressed figs, which are shrunken from the way it is naturally, and the other one is in its natural state. So the question is from a midah and a mishkol standpoint, you can't give too little, then it's still going to be tevel. You also can't give too much, because hamarbe b'maisro is peiroisa misukanim, but maisroisa mikukalim. These were the 3 areas in halacha that this